All right, we'll get started. It's great to see a lot of the usual suspects here again on such a beautiful day. I'm very proud to introduce Mike Boester. It is very rare when the town puts out a want ad to be on a committee, and the chance was to be on the cemetery committee. I was so surprised when anybody applied for the job. So Michael has been helping us out with the cemeteries here and is on the Historic Advisory Committee. He teaches geography at MCC. I had a couple of people contact me and say, I never knew there was a geography of cemeteries, but so we're all going to learn something, and it's great to have Michael here talking to us about cemeteries.
He has a foot in the grave, does it?
You'll have to ask him about that. Thank you all.
Thanks, Bob. Let's give Bob a round of applause. He's done an excellent job this year with the Historic Lecture Series, so I appreciate Bob doing all that work for the town. So can you hear me okay? Okay, so I'm gonna have to come clean from the very beginning in that the title is The Geography of Cemeteries, but the actual title is Cemeteries as Evolving Cultural Landscapes. So when I proposed that title to Bob, Bob said no one would show up if I used that academic title. So we say what? We say The Geography of Cemeteries. But another problem, once again, is that many people don't know what geography is and how geographers study the earth. So you probably thought I was going to do like, capitals in the states, and that's what many people assume geography is all about. but it's much more than that. So we'll do a little bit of academics at the beginning. I want this to be interactive, so I'm going to kind of do this the way I teach my classes. Anytime you have any questions, you let me know, and hopefully we'll have some fun over the next hour or so. So what is the cultural landscape, first of all? One of the reasons why I majored in geography is because it's really the best of both worlds. What do I get to do? I get to talk about the natural landscape, physical geography. I teach a course in physical geography where we may talk about the weather, climates. We talk about physical geography and topography. And then the very next course is going to be human geography, which is a social science. So that's what brings geography into an academic field. And going into the cultural landscape goes all the way back to the early 1900s. So I'm not here to read to you. I just want to give you some academic background as to why geographers actually look at cemeteries. So Carl Sauer, the Berkeley School of Geography, says that a cultural landscape is fashioned from a natural landscape by a cultural group. So what does that mean to us? That means that, you know, we work with the physical geography that we have and we build things. And you can read a lot about a culture by seeing what they build, where they build it. Does that make sense to you guys? So, you know, the classic example to get individuals to understand where I'm coming from here, you have a roof over your head. Why does your roof look like this? That's a question for you. So, because of our physical geography, right? We get precipitation, we get snow here. Obviously, we get snow here. And we want that to do what? We want that to be shed off. It's much easier to do what? It's much easier to build a flat roof. It's cheaper to build a flat roof. But because of our environment, we build our houses to look like this. Making sense to you? All right, so we'll keep going. So the things humans build in response to human-environment interaction, we find different houses as we go across the United States. We find different houses as we go across the globe, and that's all based in where you're from and what materials you have available. So it's also a big part of material culture. So you guys are my bright group. You guys should be able to handle this. How many of you attended the cobblestone presentation that Bob brought in a couple weeks ago, right? Those cobblestones are what? They're using the available resources that you have in your backyard. You want to farm, you start plowing the fields, you find all these stones. What are we going to do with them? We can build a wall out of them, which is particularly useful. So you see stone fences all over the place. But we can also do what? We can get enough of them to actually build a house. But you guys also know, particularly if you attended that presentation, which was outstanding, is that those two evolve over time. In the beginning, it's going to be what? It's going to be just meeting your needs. You want a roof over your head, you want a kitchen to cook in, place to sleep. But then what happens to those cobblestone houses as we evolve over space and time? They get big, they get what? They start to meet your wants rather than just your needs, right? So now we need a what? We want a bathroom in the house, not outside. We want what? We want a room where we can put a television. Got it? So that was a part of what? Cultural evolution over space and time, and that's what we're going to be looking at. I have a particular interest in housing, and then also cemeteries. So cemeteries as evolving cultural landscapes, which will be our focus as we work through the next few slides. But what separates housing from cemeteries that is important from my field point of view is that housing can be what? Remodeled. Housing can be retrofitted. So you buy that 1929 colonial or you buy that old farmhouse from the 1800s, and what are you going to do with it? You're going to put in a modern bathroom. You're going to put in a modern kitchen. So those things don't look the exact same as they did when they were built in the 1800s. What is particularly important about a cemetery? It's sacred space. So why is that such an important tool for a geographer to look at a place and look at their cemeteries? Because when you put up that mausoleum in the 1800s or you put up that stone in the 1800s, you generally don't touch it. You're not going to remodel that stone. Does that make sense to you? So it's really a snapshot of what's going on in that place at that time, and it doesn't change over time. So a very, very powerful tool for geographers. So let's get into this. We're looking for, the reflection of the cultures that built those cemeteries. Will you be able to walk into a cemetery and see what religion they're practicing? Question for you, yeah? Absolutely. How would you know? symbols. So you'll see crosses, you'll see other symbology that represents that they're Christians. So that's what I'm looking for here. What can we learn about that particular population by looking at their grave sites? How many of you have been in a modern cemetery recently? Yeah, some of you may be maintaining a site, right? And I'll be asking that question in a few minutes. But you're going to see more modern symbols there. So what's their favorite basketball team? What's their favorite baseball team, right? So it's a snapshot of what that particular culture finds interesting and important at that time. And then one last big academic thought for you guys is that it's a tangible microcosm of reality and perception. So that's pretty technical, I apologize. But you guys can handle this. You can understand where I'm coming from in this image. So this is the only image I have that's not a local cemetery. And I want you guys to tell me what a geographer sees based on what I've been trying to get across to you for the last 5 minutes. Why is this a picture that I show all my classes at MCC to explain to them why I want them to join me at Mount Hope and walk through that cemetery? The monuments are not granite. These are actually going to be called white bronze in a few minutes, which will be important to us. We would have to learn more about it, but these white bronze would have been ordered through a catalog. So let me toss some questions out to you to see if you guys are on the same page with me. Would this have been a wealthy family? How do you know it's not a wealthy family? How can you make that prediction of their culture? Pretty simple. They're flat on the ground, right? So they didn't build a huge monument. They didn't build a mausoleum. These are, what we're going to call lawn markers. Were they poor necessarily? Why would you say that, Babette? I love you, Babette. You can handle these questions. Absolutely. So if we're talking someone who couldn't afford a monument, you're going to have an unmarked grave, right? So we're probably looking at what? A middle-class family in the 1800s. This is specifically a cemetery that I found in Indiana when I was doing some research. And it just caught my eye as I'm driving through this cemetery. I'm like, I've got to take a picture of that because it just sums up what I'm trying to get across when I'm talking about cemeteries as an evolving cultural landscape. Who gets the big plaque? The father gets the big plaque, right? And I know it's hard to see from where you're sitting, but Thomas, you can see Thomas's full name, you can see Thomas's date of birth, you can see Thomas's date of death, right? So daddy gets the big piece of chicken, daddy gets also the big plaque in the cemetery. So who then can we assume is next to Thomas? Thomas's wife is next to him, but what do you notice about Thomas's wife's plaque? Much smaller, so taking on that secondary status. I'm not here to upset you. I'm here to tell you that this is the fact of what? The mid-1800s in America. The woman's going to take on the what? The secondary status here. She gets a plaque, she gets her name, gets her date of death, does not even have the date of her birth. And then this is a particularly powerful plaque, and it's the real reason why I took the image. Can anyone see what it says? Not the second wife, good guess, right? That's also something that's going to be common at this time for a specific reason. It says baby. So what is also going to be a sad reality of the mid-1800s in the United States? Infant mortalities. But this even, take it to the next level. You guys are my bright class today. Probably dies at birth. How would we make that prediction? Which says baby, also, they're not what? There's no name there. Are you guys still with me? So what would have been critically important in the mid-1800s is going to be a way to memorialize yourself, a way to live on after you die. And that's why in the 1800s we get juniors, we get the thirds, we get the fourths. Is that making sense to you? So in this case, what can we predict? We can predict this is obviously an infant mortality. They had enough money to buy a plaque for that baby, but they just put baby on it. They did not give that child a name because the goal is to have a what? Is to have that son particularly that you can name Junior to carry on your name after you pass. So that's what we don't know about this. So we don't know if the mother died during childbirth, because it just gives you the date of death, and then on the other stone, it just says baby. Doesn't give a date on that, but that would be a prediction, right? And then you mentioned second wife. So what would have been the trend in the 1800s? You have an older gentleman who marries probably a younger girl, and what's the first thing that gentleman wants? Wants a child. So you have teenage girls having children, what? Very early. You don't have the health care. You're probably, giving birth in the home on a dirt floor. And then what ends up happening? Bad things happen in that situation. In some cases, your wife dies. So what would have been Victorian culture? Victorian culture is that the husband takes a year to grieve and then does what? Goes right back for another wife. And then for those of you that want to join me at Mount Hope in a future tour, what you'll find are family plots where the husband has first wife, second wife, and in some rare cases, maybe even a third wife in that family plot with them. So good questions. You guys are with me. Okay, so let's go into the evolution of U.S. cemeteries. So I want to throw out a caveat to you is that it says evolution of U.S. cemeteries, but I'm using Victor cemeteries as all my examples. So all the photos going forward will be from Victor, but this is an attempt to get you guys to understand why I'm doing this, is that this is a template that can be applied in Rochester. I've given this presentation at other historical societies using Rochester as an example. I could have done this in Canandaigua because it's just what? It's showing us how things change over space and time. Still with me? Okay, so pioneer family homestead graveyards, common until the early 1900s. Small plots for family members, family owned and maintained, often found in pastures. So questions back out to you. Why would they often use pastures for grave sites? Yep, good point, good point. It's already cleared. Try to dig a hole in the forest is a challenging thing to do, right? The Amish still do this, so if you're ever in an Amish community and you see a pasture, you'll often see a fenced-off portion of that pasture that is being used as their grave site. So it's pretty interesting to see that trend continue with that particular folk culture. Various monument designs, in some cases no monuments if you don't have the money or if the monument has been lost. Many have been lost and abandoned, many have been exhumed and relocated. So why would they exhume these locations and relocate them? Yeah. Absolutely. So, in many cases, you're buying a piece of property and you've essentially bought a family graveyard. So many individuals are like, I don't want to maintain that graveyard. I don't want to lose the space on my land. So you would actually have the bodies relocated. We were talking about this before. There's a family graveyard local where they had exhumed the bodies and moved them. So do we have any examples? You guys are locals. You guys should know some examples of family and pioneer graveyards. That it? Oh, a home, yeah.
Well, it still is pasture,
Right.
but grass is different.
Right.
Rows of 5.
Yep.
There are no marks.
Yep. So that's an excellent example. I knew I could rely on you to give me an excellent example. I live in Fishers. There's a Fishers family graveyard, and many of those bodies have actually been exhumed for use for a different purpose, right? The example you were using at the beginning of today? Dillman, right? Excellent. So you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Right down the road from where I live is the Park Cemetery. And the town is maintaining this particular graveyard, right? So we can see this. Parks, I believe, the homestead's still across the street at that Go Car Wash. Am I right, Babbitt? Yep. So there's a family monument there, and the town does a great job with the flowers, wouldn't you agree? But what do we see? We see a whole lot of, missing monuments. You'll see a base, but there's no marker there. And in, for the majority of the graveyard, what does a geographer see? So it's what? It looks like a park space, right? That's the point I'm trying to get across. There's no one maintaining that from the family. You didn't, in many cases, you didn't have money to put up a monument, so there might be what? Unmarked burials there. And other, you know, maybe the tablets were broken, lost over time. So it's still what? It's still sacred space. We're still set it aside as like a park area. You can sit there on a bench if you wanted to. But these are what happen. This is what happens to these family graveyards. They often they're just often abandoned and then found by accident in some cases. So that's our local example of that. So we're looking at the evolution. What's going to be the next evolution in time? You're not going to be buried in your backyard or your front yard. You'll be buried in the urban area where you live. And we have an outstanding example right across the street in the Victor Village Cemetery. So we're looking at urban, town or city graveyards. For those of you who are paying real close attention, I continue to use the term graveyard rather than cemetery for a specific reason. So we're looking at public or private burial grounds dedicated within the city limits, common until the early 1800s, generally unplanned, usually no trees, various monument designs. So you guys are well-traveled. I can see it in your eyes. How many of you have been to Boston? Have you ever walked the Freedom Trail in Boston and seen all those old urban graveyards? They're absolutely beautiful. If you haven't been to Boston, if you haven't seen those, I encourage you to take a trip to Boston as soon as possible. But many of them will be black slate, so they'll be dark-colored monuments. And when I say they have gloomy or somber symbols, memento mori, what you're looking at is, you know, skull and crossbones. You'll see death extinguishing life, life represented by a candle, okay? You'll see epitaphs. You guys know what an epitaph is? So it's, you know, your last statement on your gravesite. One of the most interesting ones I've read in Boston was, death is a debt to nature due, which I have paid, and so must you. So these are, you love those? Yeah, so do I. They're amazing, right? But it's also one of the reasons why many people view cemeteries to be, you know, dark and morbid, and why would anybody want to go walk through one of these when they're depressing, right? Well, they get that idea from these urban graveyards, okay? So let's go to some examples here, local. So as I said, right across the street, we have the Victor Village Cemetery, and it is a very unique cemetery. In my research, I'm just continuing to be amazed by its layout. The fact that it's behind the Methodist Church almost gives you the sense that it started off as a churchyard cemetery, which I don't. I'm not talking about churchyard cemetery specifically, but has anyone ever seen a churchyard cemetery? Right behind the cemetery, you'll often have a grave site, right? Those are laid out very, very importantly in that all the feet point towards the east. So why would the feet point towards the east? Anyone with me? Or have I lost you? Sun rises in the east, so they believe that the second coming would also come from the east, so they want to be facing that. But the history of the graveyard predates the Methodist Church. So it's kind of confusing as to how this all plays out over space and time. But you get older tablets that are behind the Methodist Church, and then as we walk through the cemetery, we can see it evolve as well. And then, once again, we have marked graves, marked marble grave sites, and then others that are not marked, which would be a reflection of individuals who maybe they could afford a monument, maybe they couldn't afford a monument. Question?
In your first slide, flat stones or grave markers, you had mentioned that those were white grass or something like that. Well, there are, I don't know, 3 or 4 memorials in this cemetery made of the same thing, and I've always heard them referred to as zinc monuments, and
Yeah.
Sure or not, I've heard that you could order them out of the Sears catalog.
Man, if I had a gold star, I would put it on your forehead. You're pushing me through my presentation, which I'm pressed for time. We're going to talk about white zinc, we're going to talk about white bronze, which are zinc monuments, in a few minutes. So excellent question. These are marble tablets. If we're in Boston, it's more likely that they would have used the local material slate, and it would be black. But in this location, they're using what? They're using marble. And excellent question. I'm all pumped up now. Don't know the exact history. Like I said, I'm relatively new here. I'm still learning a lot about Victor and learning a lot about these cemeteries. They may have just filled things up in order. That's one of the ways that this was done. So start in one spot, get a row in, get the next row in. In other cases, you could pick and choose where you wanted to go. I would like to know more about this particular site in terms of individuals who couldn't afford a plot. Have you heard of a potter's field before? So a potter's field is essentially land set aside for individuals who cannot afford their own plot, their own stone. So how would they have handled that? That's going to be more homework on my part. I'll come back in a couple years and give you an updated version of this presentation. But that might be the story in terms of the unmarked graves. I don't know that. And then what else does the geographer see here? You guys are doing fantastic. What else can we see? Open spots. Babette was talking about using metal detectors to find out if someone's there. If you're ever on Lake Ave in Rochester, the oldest graveyard in Rochester is King's Landing. And what you can see there is actually what they call subsidence, because they didn't require vaults until the 1900s. So you can actually see indentations in the ground where there's burials. And if you look at it real close, you can see that the whole place is full, right? So in this case, we might see some subsidence. Does anyone know what this symbol represents? It's a child. But you're one of my brightest students this afternoon. Our little Fanny. What then can we say about this family? And this is, this is not an uplifting story, but it means that Fanny what? Died when she was little, maybe an infant mortality, but she got a name, right? And the lamb is the classic symbol. Whenever you see a lamb in a cemetery, it generally represents an infant who passed. And also miniaturization. I've been in Catholic cemeteries doing research, and they would segregate all the infants, and they would actually miniaturize all the monuments. So the monuments will be much smaller than they would be for an adult, which is going to get me to a point here in a minute if I can get there. I was asking Bob about this. Bob and I met with the family who knows these two little children, our little Willie and our little Molly. Talk about sad, and this is a sad reality of the times as well. In many cases, you didn't just lose one child, you would lose more than one child, right? So our little Willie and our little Molly, the family descendants actually want to put up a granite monument. So they want to put up something a little more permanent. What's the problem with marble? Bob and I were talking geology before you guys showed up today. What's the problem with marble? Does anyone know?
Marble weathers very fast.
Acid precipitation will etch it. So what's the problem in these particular tablets is that as the acid does what etches it, sooner or later you'll lose our little Willie and our little Molly, so you won't even know who was there. And that's why the family wants to put up a more permanent monument. So we'll see how this goes over space and time. We have a very common monument symbol. So I've got an entire glossary of symbols for these cemeteries. What do you see? I see Emily, wife of David, right? Can you see this? Pardon me?
Sometimes you see where they came from.
Where they came from is very common.
First, the pioneers, they write it in there.
Yeah, they do. You're absolutely right. So you'll see around here if they're from Massachusetts or something like that. Yeah. I see a broken column. Do you see that? Does anyone know anything about the symbolism that you'll find in these urban graveyards?
It's sort of a life cut short.
A life cut short, absolutely. So a broken column represents that this individual died way early. And also, another very common symbol there is going to be a tree cut off. So if you see a truncated tree, it means the same thing, someone who didn't live to their full life expectancy. And if we look real close here, I know it's hard to see from where you're sitting. It looks like Emily was 22 years old, so I'm way too young, obviously, but that's a common story in these cemeteries. And then one of the reasons why I love the Victor Village Cemetery is because as you're walking towards the west in the cemetery, you can see it get newer. So we can see it do what? It evolves in its own spot. These urban cemeteries will switch over to what's going to be called a rural cemetery in a few seconds. But we can see that switch is already being made in this particular example. You guys ever seen an obelisk before? So what's an obelisk? What kind of statement is that making on the landscape? Babette's eyes just flashed right there.
I'm just thinking about the Leaning Tower.
The Leaning Tower. So you guys are familiar on cultural diffusion. So where do we find these? We find these in Egypt. They actually would have represented the sun god in Egypt, the immortality of the pharaohs, right? Then we fast forward through space and time. The Romans do what? Pillage Egypt, take them into Rome, change the symbology behind it. Then they diffuse into Europe. They ultimately diffuse in the United States at this point in time in the early 1800s. And they changed the actual meaning of the symbol. So you'll put a Christian cross on this Egyptian monument and say that it is what? It is the light of God shining down and illuminating humanity, right? But you guys are my bright group. You guys have studied psychology before, right? These are what? These are patriarchal stones. These are phallic symbols, yes? So what will be the goal then, as we go from just meeting needs to now wants, we want a what? We want a bigger obelisk. I'm more important than you because my obelisk is what? Is bigger than yours. Who gets the big obelisk in the United States? Been all over in terms of pictures lately. Washington, absolutely. That's not by accident, right? All right. So we've got obelisks, and we're in the newer section. Something else we'll see is actually a family plot, which takes us to the rural cemetery movement here in a second. So one of the things that catches a lot of people off guard when they go into these older cemeteries is that you would not have just bought a plot for yourself and for maybe your wife. You would have bought a huge chunk of land, and you would have wanted your entire family to be buried there. One of the most important things you could have done in the mid-1800s is what? Take care of that family, and take care of that family by making sure everyone was going to be what? Buried together. And then you would put a fence around it. So this is actually a beautiful example. In many cases, the fences have rusted away, we've lost them, or they've been pulled out for other reasons. But the Hawkins family plot still has the iron fence around it, and it's in excellent shape, actually. So it's relatively new. Someone replaced it then, or what do you think?
Yeah, but remember when it was done through the cemetery committee, just when I was on that a long time ago.
Well, that's why it looks so awesome. If you go to Mount Hope, you'll still see the remnants of these where the fences were there, but they've fallen into disrepair. So this is an important part of our next evolution. And then talking about this particular monument. So what does a geographer see? It's the white bronze monuments. So we're seeing the white bronze monument. These are a powerful story as well. Because in my human geography class, what we're going to say is that this is the beginning of the popular culture movement in these cemeteries. So who would have made that obelisk? Who would have made those marble tablets? It would have been stone cutters. And obviously these are artisans. These are going to cost you some money, right? These white bronze monuments, these are cast. And they're cast out of zinc. And there would have been only one company in the United States in Bridgeport, Connecticut that would have been making these. And it would have been sold through catalogs. You guys are too young to remember, but once upon a time we had the what? People were buying things through catalogs like Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward. Are you guys still with me? And this would have been a catalog that would have showed up. There would have been dealers who would have came and out, and they would have what? They would have put the sales pitch on you that these are what? They're cheaper. They're what? They're gonna last longer than the stone. These are things that you can, you can get a beautiful monument for a much lower price, because they can do what? They can mass produce them. And then the way that it would work is that as family members passed, you would contact the company, and then they would make the plates that would then get what? Get attached to the monuments. So they're hollow, they're made out of zinc.
Too.
Pardon me?
Customizable, you could put angels and.
Absolutely, and it would have described the monument symbols to you as well. Do you want a lamb for an infant, or do you want a sheaf of wheat for someone who lived a long life? So they would have actually explained what the symbolism meant behind it. And you could have spent an unbelievable amount of money on this, depending upon how big you want to go, and I have other examples. So great job, love this group. And then I got some pictures here of us working recently on the Victor Village Cemetery. We have been trying to clean it up. So Bob's been in charge of that. You can see John Butler also helping us out. We brought out the Key Club from Victor High School. And those kids have been putting a lot of effort into maintaining this graveyard, which I appreciate. And we use something actually called Endurance. And for those of you that are familiar with using like Wet and Forget or something like this, the last thing you want to do is any damage. So you actually can spray these monuments down, and it'll slowly break down the moss and the lichens. So as you continue to drive by our village cemetery, it should look better and better going forward. And indeed it has. And then the question, one of the things I try to emphasize to the students, I mean, we're talking high school students here who have typically not spent any time in the graveyard or cemetery. So why are we doing this? And we're doing this out of respect, obviously, but also we want to know the stories. And this is a story stone. So on this previous image, you can see that John was spraying down this marble tablet, and then if we can read it, we can know about Edwin. And Edwin was killed at Millport, New York. If you look real close, I know you guys can't see it as well as I can see it. While employed at the Northern Central Railroad Company, fell between the cars and was killed. So it's a story stone. It tells you what happened to Edwin, right? And then you guys have been doing a fantastic job. What do we also notice here? Age 24 years, 7 months, and 3 days. Do we do that anymore? Do we do that anymore? Why would they have done that?
Level of detail, but
So this is an important cultural clue. What are you guys thinking? Why would they have done that in 1869 for Edwin?
well, they don't have his date of birth on there.
Bingo. So what can we actually do? You can actually do the math if you wanted to, and you figure out the exact date of birth, which is important, from a genealogical. You guys been doing any genealogy, trying to figure out days and locations. We can do what? We can do the math and figure out exactly when Edwin was born, who his relatives would have been, maybe mom, dad, whatever, right? Culturally, what is it saying? It's saying every day is important, right? Not just that what? That 24 years, but that what? 7 months in those 3 days. That this is a what? This is a life that you have to what? Seize it. You have to seize that day. And you have to take advantage of every day that you get on this planet. Okay. So let's go to the rural cemetery movement. I'll try to pick things up here. They're known as garden cemeteries, Victorian cemeteries for the Victorian era, also called romantic cemeteries, because now we're going to start to do what? We're going to start spending some money, and we're going to put some art in nature is what we'll be doing here. And I can start using the term cemetery, because cemetery would have been a synonym for a dormitory. So are you still with me? What have I been calling them up until this point? Graveyards, boneyards, things like that. Here's where we start calling them cemeteries. And it's also, trying not to go too deep into the weeds, we see a cultural shift in America. And a lot of people are going back to their religion, right? why would we have seen a lot of negative epitaphs and individuals who were like, yeah, I'm dead, but I was once like you, and pretty soon you're going to be just like me? These are what? These are individuals who are not happy about how short life was and how hard life was, right? Now we're getting into what? Now we're getting into the mid to 1800s. We're getting some wealth developed, and we're going back to our religion. So what are we going to start to see? On these monuments, instead of negative and somber epitaphs, we're going to start to see positive epitaphs. I'm only sleeping, and I've gone home, and we'll all be together again, right? So we start to see the change. Also, we get rid of the black slate, we go to white marble, gray granite, and then the white bronze is going to be particularly important. First example is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So when you go to Boston in the future, walk the Freedom Trail, see those old urban graveyards in the city, and then go out to Cambridge and you'll see America's first rural cemetery. Planned, landscape, trees, absolutely beautiful. So we got the light-colored monuments. Monuments increase in size as we go through the 1800s. That'll be on the quiz at the end. Are you ready? Peaceful, picturesque setting, park-like green space. How many of you have been in a park? What can you say from this point forward after hanging out with Mikey B for the last half hour or so? Parks begin in cemeteries. How many of you have been to Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester? So that would have been our first park in Monroe County. And when Monroe County is faced with this decision, are we going to build a park like at Mendon Ponds? Are we going to start building public parks? The argument is, why are we going to waste money on building a park when we have Mount Hope? So if you spent time in a park, it all begins in the rural cemetery movement. So we're going out into this green space, we're leaving the city, and we're going to do what? We're going to get back to nature. Our example is Boughton Hill. So Boughton Hill has its own unique history. It would have been a family graveyard, I believe, and then it evolves over into a rural cemetery association. So we have Boughton Hill Cemetery. And most of these rural cemeteries, you start spending money on things that are not grave sites. So we have a beautiful gate, and the size of the gate is going to be a reflection of the wealth of that particular region. So if you're in, Mount Auburn in Boston, what do you think that gate's going to look like? Yeah, we're talking big bucks, right? So I'm not putting down our gate. We have a gate. Babette can tell you more about the Boughton School, one of the original schools in this region, right, Babette?
This was the original town square, so
Excellent.
cemetery, school.
A little bit of everything, right. So as we go in, what does the geographer see? You guys are doing okay, I don't want you getting tired. What's that? Obelisk. When you go into a rural cemetery, you always start up front, because what's going to be a major goal? A major goal is that you want to be up front and you want to flaunt your wealth up front. So not just a small obelisk up front, but a huge obelisk up front. Then we go in, and then what we get is some competition in these rural cemeteries. So you get what? There's a little bit of benefit to dying a little bit later and having a little bit more money, because you can get a what? A bigger obelisk. And I'm not being disrespectful. This is something that you'll see again and again and again in these rural cemeteries. We have a couple of marble tablets, so we're still seeing the marble tablets being used, but these are going to be, huge marble tablets, in some cases 4 feet tall, right? And also you'll start to see some symbols going on it, and then the positive epitaphs. I zoomed in on this before today's lecture. Here is where I sleep, but I have gone on to be with my God. So it's taking a positive look at the passing. And then the husband next to them, also with a positive epitaph.
Michael,
Yeah?
so which is the husband on the left?
The husband's on the right, and then this is Hannah. You know the family?
I don't know, what I was looking at was that one was a little taller than
It is, isn't it?
That should be the way it's
Hannah's is a little bit taller, and who knows why on that? Maybe this one's settled, that would be my guess.
It kind of looks like the bottoms would have been equal.
Yep. They're matching stones. Excellent observation. Also, what do we need to do? We need to get the Key Club out at Bowden Hill spraying some of these monuments as well, so that we could read them. They lived into their 70s, which is going to be what? Pretty good run at this time, right? Living their full life expectancy. Since Babette got me on this, one of the things that you'll also see in the rural cemeteries is that you'll see the wives continue to take on that secondary status, okay? So you'll see the husband's full name, and then you see Hannah, wife of, and then you'll get the husband's name again, right? So this is something obviously that Susan B. and everyone is fighting for in the 1800s for women's rights and their rights to have their full name there, right? What does a geographer see? We'll get through this. I gotta pick up the pace. What's that monument? That's another white bronze monument, but this is someone doing what? Spending a lot of money on their white bronze monument. And then as we get farther into the cemetery, what do we see with the obelisks? We're getting even taller. Some of you are still with me. I love this particular family plot because everyone in the family also got their own white bronze headstone. So this is someone who put the patriarchal family stone up, and then as individuals passed, they could get their own smaller headstone put in place as well. This one caught my eye. Once you have spent as much time researching cemeteries as I have, things just like, wow. There's another white bronze monument, right? Everyone's getting their white bronze headstone, right? Except for that brother. Do you see that? So what can we predict in that scenario? I guess I didn't give you the full history. So the White Bronze Monument Company in Bridgeport, Connecticut exists up until World War I. And then the federal government's going to take over that factory to use that casting plant for munitions, right? So what does this mean in terms of this family member?
He died later than that.
Passes after they're able to make the what? To make the headstone for that particular individual. So they go and buy a granite monument for that brother. Pretty cool. What's the geographer see? You guys didn't know that I was going to ask you all these quiz questions, did you? So that's a broken column, right? But it's not just a symbol of a broken column on a stone. It's an actual what? It's an actual broken column. So now we're doing what? Now we're breaking the bank to memorialize our family plot. And then you can see that this would have been fenced as well. But this was what I was talking about in terms of most of the fences in these rural cemeteries. They've either, fallen into disrepair and been removed. Do you see that hole that's in that cornerstone? That tells you that there would have been another pipe that went from here to here that would have set off the family plot, right? What happens to a lot of that fence? A lot of it is also taken out once again during World War II. So they would have used it for scrap. And then you guys are my bright group. What is a big problem with any existing metal that's in these rural cemeteries in the 21st century?
Get scrapped.
People come in and they will do what? They'll steal it for scrap, right? So sad vandalism. And then one of the things I emphasize to my geography students is that you use what's available. Use what's available locally. So when I grew up in St. Louis, there would not have been these glacial erratic monuments. But in Monroe County and in western New York, a glacial erratic is what? Something that you find all the time in these areas. You guys know what I'm talking about with a glacial erratic, right? So you'll have individuals that'll do what? They'll carry them out to their cemetery plot, put a plaque on it, and say, we're going to make that my monument. There's a famous one at Mount Hope for Henry Ward, and it is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. He brought it in from Canada. So how about this? What does a broken obelisk mean?
Vandalism?
Good point. You've been my best student today. I'm trying to trick you is what I'm trying to do here. This was not supposed to be a broken obelisk. What has happened?
Looks like the ground shifted.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So if you're taking my physical geography class, we're going to call that root wedging, right? So let's see if you guys can pass my quiz here. What's the problem with the rural cemetery movement? Why was the rural cemetery movement unsustainable? Couple different reasons. First reason, you'd have some wealthy individual come in and buy a great big chunk of land and then not use it. So now we're buying up all this property and we're not guaranteeing that every one of those plots are going to be used. Second problem, if you've taken a literature class, is that nature doesn't care about your art. Right? So they've spent an unbelievable amount of money putting up this beautiful obelisk, and what has happened over time? The tree won, right? The tree tilted that monument, and then the obelisk falls, and you end up with a broken obelisk. So I don't know if there is a goal at Bowden Hill to repair any of these, but it's something that Bob and I are concerned about with our own village cemeteries, that we have some obelisks that are slowly leaning. So we'll see what happens over time. So what is the evolution after rural cemeteries? It's going to be lawn park cemeteries. What do you think will happen in a lawn park cemetery? It is what it says it is. This was not that big of an academic leap here. We're going to do what? We're going to get rid of the trees. We're going to turn it into more of a lawn park cemetery. Do we have an example of a lawn park cemetery in Victor? Absolutely, absolutely. So St. Patrick's will be my example for the lecture. Granite monuments, we start to use granite instead of marble. You'll get various colored monuments, so we'll allow different colors in. Monuments decrease in size as we go through the 1900s. 1800s, they get bigger. 1900s, they get smaller. And it's going to be organized in practical use of space. What's the big problem? The big problem is in those rural cemeteries, you have individuals buying these big chunks of land, and they just can't keep up. So we decide that we're going to go with the lawn park cemetery, and we're going to make sure that all these plots are used. So you have a more organized and a more efficient use of space. Cincinnati is the classic example. If you're ever in Cincinnati, I encourage you to check out Spring Grove, but we have St. Patrick's right in our own backyard. So what does a geographer see? Nice, neat rows, right? There is an old section, and this is the older section, and I'm hoping you guys are understanding what a geographer sees in this case. We know that's the older section because people continue to bring those traits from the rural cemetery out. So we see the obelisk on top, right? And we'll see family plots where you're buying more than just one or two places. So this is the old section. Here is a family plot. They've even put in the cornerstones. What didn't they put in? They didn't put a fence in. So they put the cornerstones in the corner, put them at ground level to make it easy to maintain the grass. But the family is still together. And we can also see that we're going to continue to use some of the symbols that we would see in the rural cemetery. A lamb, unfortunately, another child death. And then we have the obelisk on the highest point. Out of all my research in the local cemeteries, this is the tallest obelisk I found. And it's at the Lawn Park Cemetery at St. Patrick's. But it's absolutely beautiful. So we see that Lawn Park Cemetery landscape, nice and verdant, well maintained. The grass is being maintained excellent out there. You still find trees, but the trees are going to be accent trees. You're not going to typically have burials around the tree sites. Plenty of room to expand. Beautiful. How many of you guys been out there? St. Patrick's, have you guys been out there? Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful site. And John Butler and his team's doing an excellent job maintaining it. Block monuments, what's happening? Monuments get shorter, smaller as we go through the 1900s. And here's the newer section, which takes us to modern cemeteries. So, memorial parks. I do not have an example of a memorial park in Victor, but you guys have impressed me this afternoon. There is a memorial park in the area. Does anyone know where it is? Does anyone know what a memorial park is, first of all? How are you going to define it? All the monuments are going to be lawn monuments, lawn markers, so everything's Whitehaven over on, what is that, Marsh Road? Across from the Powers Farm Market. Many of you go over there to buy some apples, right? So that is an example of a memorial park. Everything's going to be flat on the ground. Forest Lawn in Glendale is going to be the first example, a famous cemetery in California. And what are we going to do? We're going to take everything down to the ground, linear, maximize space, make it very easy to maintain as well. You just run a mower directly over the monuments. Modern cemeteries, to wrap up today's lecture, it's going to be really a combination of lawn parks and memorial parks, and they'll be planned. We'll get rid of the trees across where people are being buried and only use them as accent trees, decorative trees, and you get various monument designs. And something that becomes interesting as we go through the 1900s, and one of the reasons why I asked you this question a few minutes ago is year-round adornments become more and more popular today than they would have been in the 1800s. In the 1800s, you would have not have gone out to Mount Hope to put out, you know, a soap carving or put out even flowers at that grave site. You may have gone out there on a weekend to have a picnic and celebrate life, but you would not been putting anything out at the grave site. What do you find in modern cemeteries today? What have you seen in modern cemeteries? Flowers, absolutely. Anything else?
Flags?
Flags, very common, absolutely. And if you spend any time in cemeteries, you'll be surprised what you find out there. People are bringing very unique items, toys, pictures, stones. I've seen landscape edging. They'll even go out and put the landscape edging out, so it's beautiful. So for those of you who have not seen a memorial park, if you are in a cemetery and all the stones are flat on the ground, that is the true definition of a memorial park. And you can see that this is Bowden Hill. So what do you guys know about Bowden Hill? Starts off as a what? Family graveyard, transitions into a rural cemetery, and now is what? Now it's a modern cemetery where it's still active. There are still individuals being buried out at Bowden Hill. There's some flags. The flags are often tied to veteran service. So there's groups that put those flags out. And then Bob and I might hit you up for some money at the end of today's presentation because we're also involved with Wreaths Across America, where they'll put wreaths out in the winter. And we're fundraising for that right now. And then you get contemporary symbols, year-round adornments, people bringing out flowers, pinwheels, people putting symbols that you don't need, need a glossary to define it. So like weeping willow, what does a weeping willow mean? What does a lily mean? What does that ivy mean, right? That's going to have unique definitions. In the 1800s, today you'll put what? You'll put the Yankee symbol up, or this is an interesting question. What's one of the most common symbols that are engraved on a monument in the 21st century? Buffalo Bills. Go Bills. Are you a Bills fan? Are you a Bills fan?
Buffalo girl.
Well, your grade just went up. Excellent, excellent.
Also religious symbols.
Religious symbols, absolutely. So you'll see Christian crosses. We actually have a Muslim cemetery in Avon. Did you know that? Yeah, so next time you're in the Avon area, you can drive through a cemetery that's designed specifically for Muslims. So you'll see the crescent moon and you'll see the symbols of Islam. The most common symbol, I'm running out of time, is going to be a white-tailed deer. They're not amazing. They're like annoying in my backyard. They're always eating my bushes and stuff, but for some reason people love to put the white-tailed deer on their stones. So I challenge you to go into a cemetery and not find one in 2026. This is St. Patrick's. What do you see with St. Patrick's? It too has evolved into a modern cemetery. I was talking to John, and you can see that this family has planted flowers in front of the monument. Something different here that I noticed immediately is that in Western New York, Rochester, Victor, Buffalo, you guys use real flowers. You'll plant flowers. And where I'm from in the Midwest, it's all artificial flowers. So just different trends based on, you know, what the culture allows and what they don't. And this is a new block monument that's going up. This is something else that's going to catch you off guard, is that you can buy monuments locally, but more often than not, those monuments are actually being cut in China and then shipped over. Yeah, it's pretty mind-boggling. We just put up a Holocaust memorial in Mount Hope Cemetery, and it took 6 months for it to come in from China, so we waited and waited and waited, and then when it finally came in, it had a flaw in it. So it was like, you know, we're not going to bring it in, we're not going to purchase this, had to send it back, which took another 4 months for us to get it replaced. But that's what's happening with cutting these stones. Recent trends. Susie's like, get done with this, Beaster, you got 2 minutes to go. Green burial, are you guys familiar with green burial? Becoming much more common in the 21st century. So there's individuals who don't want to have a, you know, environmental impact, so they want to essentially be wrapped in a shroud, put in a pine box, go into the ground and decay naturally. The first one's going to be in South Carolina. We have a huge green cemetery outside of Ithaca called Green Springs, and the last time I spoke to the owner of that property, they just can't keep up with demand. There's such a huge demand for this green burial that they'll buy a plot, it'll sell out, they got to buy more and more land for this. What is the big trend in 2026? Cremation. Yep, absolutely, Babette. Babette does an excellent job wrapping things up. And this is something that when I was talking to my students 20 years ago, you know, I'm like, we might get up to 50% probably by 2030. And then what happened? What horrible event did we go through? We went through COVID, right? And COVID pushed us over 50% in 2021. And we are now at 60%, and we expect to exceed 80% cremation by 2045. So you guys have done an excellent job for me today. Why are people choosing cremation? Why are they doing that today? A lot cheaper, absolutely. It's a lot cheaper.
Worry about upkeep of the.
Don't have to worry about upkeep.
And
Excellent.
because the property is running out.
Yeah, there's a lot of individuals, I mean, I propose this to my students all the time. I'm like, you know, what are cemeteries about, right? What are they for, you know? And they have a dual purpose, obviously a place to dispose of the dead, but a place for people to what? For people to go out and say, I once loved you, and you were my family, right? And then a lot of people just don't want that responsibility. And a sad fact is that typically after about the third generation, most people don't know where their descendants are at, right?
Can you make an analogy to hard copy photos and digital photos?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're losing the stories.
You are, you are. I appreciate that, Babette. And then, what about our local cemeteries? Are we making this evolution?
Yeah.
So this is at what? Boughton Hill. You can now go into what? Niche space in the columbarium at Boughton Hill. And you guys know what the next slide is going to be. We've also done this at St. Patrick's, which is very unique from the Catholic point of view of allowing cremation, number one, and allowing above ground interment, number two. So Catholic Church becoming much more liberal on this. Excellent job. Only a minute late. Susie? You guys did a great job today. I know you guys weren't expecting to get hammered with a bunch of questions. Did a fantastic job. I appreciate you. So, any final questions, comments?
This was quick. My wife and I were doing cemetery hunting a couple of years ago, when we did get plots out in Grove City and Child Island, go through up in Child Island.
Okay.
Our parents are there and so forth. and so
Right.
on. Okay. But we'd also checked that it's Pioneer Cemetery over in West Child Island where a lot of pioneers were buried. In fact, it was donated by my triple great grandfather. And we considered going there. And we met one of the people and said, "Is this?" It was in what I assumed was a lot.
Right.
And he said, "Well, you know, they didn't mark this out all that carefully back in those, so, you know, yeah." I said, "Well, no, you're not digging down on it." So he said, "Oh, we're gonna bring over this big long rod."
That's what they do.
Have down
Yep.
until you strike wood. I guess.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So they have like a driving rod to find out if there's something there. And then that was using the example of using metal detectors to see if you can find any metal in the site.
Because of the nails in the coffin.
Right. And then if you got big bucks, you can use ground penetrating radar to actually see below the ground. But in many cases, they're not going to be able to do that in an old pioneer graveyard. Great story, I appreciate that. Question?
You touched upon cleaning the headstones. What is the current product or elements that you use to clean?
So it's like it's a bioenzyme cleaner. Whoa, right? And what it does is that it'll kill like the living moss and the living lichens on it, and it likes sunlight. So as the sun shines on it, it just makes it more efficient. So you want to kill the what? You want to kill the lichens and moss, and that'll slowly flake off and it'll wash off with the rain. You can speed it up a little bit. So why do we have the high school kids out there? Because we give them some scrub brushes, and we allow them to like scrub on them. They can also scrape. But what's rule number one? Rule number one is to do no damage, right? So you don't want to use like a wire brush, and you don't want to use, you know, something that's scraper, like a metal scraper. You want to use something that is softer than the material that you're using. But we're using something called Endurance is the brand name. There's another company that produces something called D2. And then you can probably Google it and find other competitors because it's becoming a big deal. Are you on social media?
Yes.
If you Google, you know, if you look on social media, a lot of people are going out into graveyards and cemeteries, and they are spending a lot of time and a lot of money cleaning up old graveyards and also restoring monuments, which is a huge job to go out and to put that monument back up and put it up correctly so it's, you know, it's done right. Question?
Has New York State ever had a law prohibiting scattering of ashes?
Yeah, I went through that slide pretty quick. You can't just scatter anywhere, right? That's bad, very, very bad. But you guys have been super intelligent this afternoon. Who's going to be watching you as you scatter on Grandpa's farm, right? So, I mean, if you don't publicize it, right, we're on the same team. I'm not going to call you in. But as far as New York law goes, you can't scatter. I mean, in terms of like scatter gardens, with scatter gardens, they still want those ashes to be buried. So if you go to Mount Hope and see the new scatter garden, there's actually, you have to pay and you have to have those ashes put in the ground. Because, I mean, you also, if you have a bunch of people scattering in the same spot, that's going to be an issue going forward as well. Good question.
In the Gulf
In the Gulf
of Mexico.
of America? That was terrible. Geography question, absolutely. I would have said the opposite. If you said Gulf of America, I would say Gulf of Mexico.
It was the Gulf of Mexico at that time.
You are brilliant because what's very common in Florida is to actually have your ashes mixed with concrete, yeah? And they turn you into an artificial reef. Have you heard about these? You haven't heard about these? So there's a company that will turn you into like a great big flower pot, and then they put these out into the Gulf. Are you familiar with this? And then this is, I mean, a lot of this stuff I didn't mention with memorial parks is that it's not kosher to make money off death, right? But we've gone full circle here. They will turn you into a reef. They will GPS tag you, right? So that family members can come out and scuba dive in the future to go see their loved one. Way to make money.
You probably heard Saved by the Bell.
Saved by the Bell, yeah?
Do you know what that means?
I don't.
Well, this is
Now, it used to be a
something
sitcom.
like in New Orleans because they couldn't bury you in the ground.
Right.
And so they put the body in the coffin with a bell, with something, and sometimes they ring the bell because.
They weren't dead.
They weren't actually dead. So
That's where Saved by the Bell comes
Saved
from.
by the Bell came from.
That's an amazing story. Have you been to New Orleans?
No, my son told me this story.
The cemeteries there are
Where
magnificent.
they put generations in the same one.
They do.
Well, they buy plots and then they move them to, you have to, well, I went to this, the cemetery in Atlanta, Georgia, and you would actually kind of rent your plot. And
I
then
love
if
you
you
guys. I'm
didn't
gonna make
pay-
you guys all take my human geography class. I got my card. I'm gonna make you take my class. This was a problem in Europe. How many of you have been to Europe? How many of you have been in the catacombs, right? So what was the issue? The issue is that they used to rent,
Yeah.
and then you would get pulled out,
If
and
you didn't
then
pay
someone
the
else
rent,
gets pulled in.
then you
Yeah.
got-
And we still find this in Singapore. Look at all this geography I'm teaching you. What's the problem in Singapore? Not enough room, right? So in Singapore, if you get buried, you get buried in order, and then they go back up to the front, and they pull out the bones and take the bones to the family. They may show up at your door and say, here you go. We got to have room for the next individual. So, cool stuff.
Yeah.
You know your
Pretty
stuff.
elaborate.
So I gave you a whole bunch of homework, right? You guys got to go to Boston, got to go to Cambridge, got to go to New Orleans,
Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia, and then take that big trip to Europe and go into the
Or they
catacombs.
could
and-
just stay here and go to our cemetery.
Absolutely. We prefer you stay here.
When I was in Germany a long time ago, I remember going by a cemetery, and I couldn't get over how many people were just walking through it as if it were a park.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
In these rural cemeteries, we want them to be parks.
Uh-huh.
And let's stay local, and let's take a tour of Mount Hope. Let's get a tour scheduled for next year. I'll give you a tour of Mount Hope if you guys are interested.
Sunday afternoon.
But the whole goal is that it's a park. And if you're in Mount Hope, there are people riding bikes, there are people running, there are people living life in Mount Hope. So it's just full of activity, it really is. Yeah, good story. Other question? Go ahead.
If anybody gets a chance, I would suggest going to Barry, Vermont, to the Hope Cemetery.
Okay,
And that has a long history of a settling area for Italian stone carvers. And they would
Okay.
get the granite right out of the granite mine there.
right,
And they would carve the most incredible works of art you have ever seen.
absolutely. I appreciate that, I really do. With these rural cemeteries, what's beautiful about the United States of America is that we put that art in the open, and anyone could look at it, And those artisans making those beautiful pieces, it's in a cemetery. I mean, think about that. And everyone has what? Access to that. And that's a beautiful thing about, living here, because if you lived in Europe, you would have had to have paid or known someone or known the individuals who are going to give you access to that. In the United States, you have access to it. Art out in the open, right? Excellent.
It's also one of the only two places in the United States that has an area dedicated to the victims of the pandemic of 1918.
1918, yeah.
Which killed a lot of the stone cutters because their lungs were already damage due to the silicosis from.
You're right.
From the stone.
You're absolutely
So
right.
They lost a lot of stone cutters.
Yep, that's an important story. So my biology colleagues at MCC, they take students to Mount Hope as well, but they're having the students look at dates and then try to find that commonality where that 1918, you see it again and again and again because of the flu